The November wind cut through Millbrook like a rusty blade, carrying the scent of coming snow across the prairie. Thomas Hartwell pulled his worn coat tighter as he approached the weathered train station, his boots crunching through the frost-covered dirt. At 42, the lines around his eyes spoke of too many sleepless nights and too many worries about keeping his small ranch afloat. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. He'd come to collect a shipment of winter supplies if he could afford them. 3 years since Sarah's death, and the debts just kept mounting. The banker's last visit had been clear. Enough. Pay up by spring or lose everything. The afternoon train had already departed, leaving behind its usual cloud of coal smoke and the echo of steel wheels. Thomas expected to find the platform empty, but a figure sat hunched on the wooden bench near the station house. A woman in white tore what had once been white. As he drew closer, his breath caught. She wore a wedding dress, now wrinkled and stained with tears and mud. Her dark hair had escaped its careful arrangement, falling in loose curls around her shoulders. She was crying softly, her whole body shaking, whether from cold or grief, he couldn't tell. Thomas approached carefully, removing his hat. Are you... Are you all right? She looked up with startled brown eyes, quickly wiping her face with trembling hands. I'm fine, she whispered, but her voice cracked on the words. Please don't mind me. Thomas glanced around the empty platform. The temperature was dropping fast, and those thin wedding dress fabrics wouldn't keep anyone warm much longer. Begging your pardon, but you don't look fine. Where's your husband? A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Gone, on the very train that brought me here. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Took one look at me stepping off that train and decided I wasn't what he'd ordered. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He'd heard of such things, mail-order brides, arrangements made through letters and photographs. But to abandon a woman like this, in the middle of nowhere? The Reverend tried to reason with him, she continued, her voice barely audible. But Charles just kept saying I was too fat, too different from what he'd expected, said he. Wouldn't be saddled with damaged goods. She laughed again, hollow and broken. So here I am. Nowhere to go, no money for a return ticket, and night coming on. Thomas felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of anger at this Charles fellow and something else. Protectiveness, maybe. The same feeling he'd had when he'd found injured. Animals on his property. What's your name? He asked gently. Lily Brennan. She met his eyes briefly before looking away. And you've been very kind, sir, but you needn't concern yourself. I'll figure something out. The wind picked up again, rattling the station windows. Thomas made a decision that surprised even him. Miss Brennan, I'm Thomas Hartwell. I've got a ranch about 3 miles out of town, nothing fancy, but it's got walls and a stove and hot coffee. He held out his hand. You're welcome to shelter there tonight. No strings attached, just ... Christian decency. Lily stared at his outstretched hand as if it might disappear. You don't know me? Could be. Anyone? Well, you're someone who needs help, Thomas said simply. And I've got a help to offer, if you'll take it. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she placed her cold hand in his. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Thank you, she whispered. As Thomas helped her to her feet, he caught sight of her face in the fading light. Despite her tears and exhaustion, there was something striking about her. Quiet strength in the set of her jaw, kindness in her eyes. Charles, whoever he was a fool. My wagon's just over here, Thomas said, guiding her toward the hitching post. It's not much of a ride, but we'll get you somewhere warm. As they walked through the gathering dusk, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that this simple act of kindness was going to change everything. He just didn't know. How much? The Hartwell Ranch sat in a valley between 2 low hills, protected from the worst of the prairie winds. As Thomas's wagon approached the modest farmhouse, Lily could see it was a place that had once known careful attention. The fence posts were straight, the barn solid, though both showed signs of deferred maintenance. "It's not much," Thomas said, climbing down from the wagon seat, "but Sarah always said it had good bones." He helped Lily down, and she noticed how he said his late wife's name with reverence, but also a deep sadness that time hadn't yet healed. The front porch creaked under their feet as he opened the door and ushered her inside. The interior was clean but sparse. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with 2 worn chairs positioned before it. A small kitchen occupied the back corner, and Lily could see a narrow staircase leading to what must be a loft bedroom. "Sarah's clothes are still upstairs," Thomas said, not meeting her eyes. "They might. Well, you're welcome to anything that fits. That dress can't be comfortable." Lily looked down at her ruined wedding gown, suddenly aware of how she must appear. "I couldn't impose. It's not imposing if it's offered," Thomas interrupted gently. "I'll get a fire going while you get settled." Upstairs, Lily found a small but tidy bedroom with a trunk at the foot of the bed. Thomas's wife had been smaller than her, but Lily managed to find a brown wool dress that, while snug, was infinitely more practical than her wedding attire. She also found a warm shawl and thick stockings. When she returned downstairs, Thomas had indeed gotten a fire crackling, and the smell of coffee filled the air. He'd also set out bread, cheese, and what looked like leftover stew. "You didn't have to," Lily began. "When did you last eat?" Thomas asked, ladling stew into a bowl. Lily tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, I think. I was too nervous to eat before the wedding." Thomas nodded and gestured to the chair across from his. "Then you need to eat now." As they shared the simple meal, Lily found herself studying her unexpected host. His hands were calloused from hard work, his brown hair streaked with premature gray at the temples. There was a sadness about him, but also a fundamental decency that made her feel safe for the first time in days. "Tell me about your wife," she said softly. Thomas paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. "Sarah? She was everything good about this place, made it a home instead of just a house." He set down his spoon. "Fever took her 3 winters ago, along with our unborn child. I'm so sorry." "What about you? How did you end up on that train to marry a stranger?" Lily wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "My parents died in a factory fire in Chicago 2 years ago. I tried to make it on my own, but ... she shrugged. When Charles's advertisement appeared in the newspaper, promising a home and respectability to the right woman, it seemed like Providence, his advertisement." Thomas frowned. "What did it say exactly? Seeking virtuous woman for companionship and marriage? Must be of good character and pleasing appearance. Comfortable home and security provided." Lily's voice turned bitter. "I suppose pleasing appearance didn't include someone of my ... proportions." Thomas looked at her across the firelight, really looked, and Lily felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to being studied so intently without judgment or derision. "His loss," Thomas said quietly. Something in his tone made Lily's breath catch. Outside, the wind howled around the house, but inside, warmth was spreading through more than just Lily's body. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely welcomed somewhere. "Mr. Hartwell, Thomas," she corrected when he raised an eyebrow. "I can't stay here indefinitely. Tomorrow, I should try to find work in town, or winter's coming hard," Thomas interrupted. "And frankly, I could use the help. This place is too much for one person, and I can't afford to hire anyone." He hesitated. "If you're willing to work cooking, mending, helping with the animals, you'd earn your keep and then some." Lily stared at him. "You're offering me employment?" "I'm offering you a place to belong if you want it." Thomas met her gaze steadily. No charity, equal partnership in keeping this place running. As if summoned by their conversation, snow began pattering against the windows. Lily looked around. The modest but welcoming room, then back at Thomas's honest face. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Winter settled over the Hartwell ranch like a heavy quilt, and with it came a routine that surprised both Thomas and Lily with its natural ease. Lily proved to have a talent for organization that the ranch had sorely missed, while Thomas's patient teaching helped her learn the rhythms of farm life. "The chickens are positively spoiled," Thomas observed one morning, watching Lily scatter grain to their small flock. "I swear they've doubled their egg production since you arrived," Lily laughed, a sound that had become more frequent over the past 6 weeks. "I just talked to them. They seem to appreciate the conversation." "What do you tell them?" "Oh, the usual gossip. How Mrs. Henderson at the general store always counts my change twice. How the banker's wife crosses the street when she sees me coming." Lily's tone was light, but Thomas caught the hurt underneath. The town's reaction to Lily's presence had been ... complicated. Some folks, like Doc Morrison and the Methodist minister's wife, had welcomed her warmly. Others whispered behind their hands and made assumptions about the nature of her arrangement with Thomas. "Pay them no mind," Thomas said, moving to stand beside her. "Half this town's got nothing better to do than manufacture scandal where none exists." "But it does exist, doesn't it?" Lily turned to face him, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "I mean, the situation is unusual. An unmarried woman living alone with a widower." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. Over the weeks, their evening conversations by the fire had grown longer, more personal. He'd caught himself watching the way lamplight played across her face, the way she hummed while she worked, the way she fit into his home, as if she'd always belonged there. "Lily," he began, then stopped. How could he explain that what had started as simple kindness had become something else entirely? That somewhere between her first night in his guest room and this moment, he'd begun imagining a future that included her permanently. Before he could find the words, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. 3 riders were coming up the drive, and Thomas recognized the lead figure with a sinking heart. "Charles Morrison," Lily breathed, going pale. Thomas moved instinctively closer to her. "The man who left you at the station with his friends." Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "He said he might come back if he changed his mind about the arrangement." The 3 men reined in their horses just outside the chicken yard. Charles Morrison was a well-dressed man in his 30s, with the soft look of someone who'd never done real physical work. His companions were cut from similar cloth sons of prominent families with too much time and too little character. "Miss Brennan," Charles called out, not bothering to dismount. "I've been thinking about our ... misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," Lily replied, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "You made your position quite clear. Now, don't be hasty." Charles's smile was patronizing. "I've had time to reconsider. You'll do well enough, I suppose, with the right ... guidance and supervision." Thomas felt something dangerous stir in his chest. "The lady's not interested, Morrison." Charles finally looked at Thomas, his expression dismissive.
"This doesn't
"Concern you, Hartwell? Miss Brennan and I have a legal arrangement, a contract." "A contract you voided when you abandoned her," Thomas replied evenly. "I believe that makes her a free woman, free to attach herself to a dirt-poor rancher." One of Charles's companions laughed. "Come now, Miss Brennan. Surely you can do better than this." Lily stepped forward, and Thomas saw something new in her posture, a strength that hadn't been there at the train station. "I found exactly what I was looking for, Mr. Morrison. A home where I'm valued for who I am, not judged for what I'm not." "Don't be ridiculous," Charles snapped, his facade of politeness cracking. "Look at yourself. You think a man like Hartwell would choose someone like you if he had better options?" The words hung in the cold air like a slap. Thomas saw Lily flinch, saw the old insecurities flicker across her face, and something inside him snapped. "You're right about one thing, Morrison," Thomas said, stepping forward. "I wouldn't choose someone like her." He turned to look at Lily, his voice softening. "I'd choose exactly her, because she's brave enough to start over, kind enough to turn a house back into a home, and strong enough to see worth in herself despite what small-minded fools have told her." Lily's eyes widened, and Thomas realized he'd just declared his feelings in front of half the county's gossips. "This is absurd," Charles sputtered. "Lily, get your things. We're leaving." No, Lily's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm staying exactly where I want to be." Charles's face darkened. You'll regret this, both of you. This won't end here. As the three men rode away, Thomas and Lily stood in the sudden silence, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. Thomas, Lily began, her voice uncertain. I meant every word, he said, turning to face her fully. I know this isn't how these things usually happen, and I know we haven't known each other long. But I love you too, Lily interrupted, her eyes bright with tears. I have for weeks now. I just didn't dare hope. Thomas reached for her hands, finding them warm despite the cold. Then let's make it official. Let's give this town something real to talk about. Spring arrived early that year, melting the last of winter's grip on the valley, just in time for what the town of Millbrook would later remember as the wedding of the decade. Because of its grandeur, the ceremony was held in the simple Methodist church with wildflowers from the prairie, serving as decoration, but because of what it represented, I still can't believe Mrs. Henderson closed the store early just to attend, Lily murmured as Thomas helped her from the wagon. She wore Sarah's wedding dress, carefully altered by the minister's wife and the seamstress working together. Fit perfectly, and Thomas thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful. Half the county's here, Thomas replied, scanning the crowd gathered outside the church. Doc Morrison, the Andersons from the next ranch over, even old Mrs. Cranston. And some who aren't, Lily observed, noticing certain conspicuous absences. Charles Morrison and his circle were notably missing, though Thomas suspected that had more to do with shame than spite. The winter had brought unexpected challenges. Charles had indeed tried to make trouble, spreading rumors and even attempting to contest the legality of Lily's broken contract, but the community had surprised them both. When the banker had come around asking uncomfortable questions about Thomas's living arrangements, 3 of his neighbors had vouched for both their characters. When supplies had run short during a particularly harsh February storm, the Andersons had shared their surplus grain without being asked. Thomas Hartwell, Doc Morrison, approached with a wide grin. Are you ready to make an honest woman of Miss Brennan? I think she's been making an honest man of me, Thomas replied, earning a laugh from Lily. Inside the church, Reverend Matthews smiled warmly as the couple approached the altar. The congregation was small but enthusiastic, and Thomas could hear Mrs. Henderson sniffling into her handkerchief from the third pew as they spoke their vows. Thomas thought about the journey that had brought them here. The abandoned bride on the platform had become the capable woman, who now managed their expanded chicken flock and had negotiated a better price for their eggs with the general store. The broken-hearted stranger had become his partner in every sense of the word, working beside him to bring the ranch back to prosperity. Lily, take you, Thomas? She was saying, her voice clear and strong, to be my husband, my partner, and my home. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared tasted of new beginnings and second chances. The reception at the church hall was simple, but joyful. The women of the congregation had contributed dishes, and someone had brought a fiddle. As the evening wore on and the dancing began, Thomas found himself amazed at how right everything felt. Any regrets? He asked Lily during a quiet moment between songs. She looked around the room at Mrs. Anderson, teaching some of the younger women a complicated dance step. At Doc Morrison telling elaborate stories to anyone who would listen, their friends and neighbors celebrating this new chapter in their lives. Only one, she said, and Thomas felt a flicker of concern until she continued. I regret that it took Charles Morrison's poor judgment to bring me here. I could have missed all of this. Thomas pulled her closer. Maybe some things are just meant to be. As if summoned by their conversation, Mrs. Henderson approached with tears in her eyes and a letter in her hand. This came on today's train, she said, pressing the envelope into Lily's hands. From Chicago. Lily opened it with trembling fingers, then smiled through sudden tears. It's from my old neighbor, Mrs. O'Brien. She says she heard about my marriage through someone who knew the minister. She's happy for me. Says she always knew I'd find my place in the world and have you. Thomas asked softly. Found your place? Lily looked up at him, then around at the roomful. of people who would become their community, their family. Outside, she could hear the evening sounds of the prairie, the wind through the grass, the distant lowing of cattle, the promise of another day's work and another day's contentment. She said simply, "I have." Later that night, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the stars come out over the valley, Thomas reflected on how much had changed since that cold November afternoon. The ranch was thriving again. The debts were manageable. The future looked brighter than it had in years. But more than that, the house had become what Sarah had always said it could be: a place where love lived and grew, where two people could build something lasting together. "Thank you," Lily said quietly, her hand finding his in the darkness. "For what?" "For seeing me when everyone else saw only what they expected to see. For giving me a chance to prove I was worth loving." Thomas brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Lily Hartwell," he said, loving the sound of her new name. "You never needed to prove that. You just needed someone with eyes to see it." As the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie settled into its nighttime quiet, two people who had been lost found themselves exactly where they belonged together, building a life that neither could have imagined alone, but both had dreamed of finding. The abandoned bride had found her forever home, and the struggling widower had discovered that love, like the prairie itself, could bloom again after the harshest winter, stronger and more beautiful than before.